It's amazing to be back on your screens with your premier source of extensive probe and up-to-the-minute reporting on the latest developments in China. Good morning and welcome to China Now. I'm your host, Makiza Latifa, and I'm thrilled to guide you through the series of segments put together to give you an educating and engaging experience. Let's begin with China Currents with Lisa, who will delve into the stories that made headways in the past week and trends that are shaping the future of China and the world at large. To start with, China has criticized the US for intimidating the World Anti-Doping Agency during the Paris Olympics. Also, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who visited China, has expressed regret for withdrawing from the Belt and Road Initiative. And then, discussions on the new threats the United States poses to world peace with its attempt to form a new NATO in Asia. Stay with us as we bring you details of these and many other compelling stories.
China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started.
Welcome to China Currents, your weekly news report on what's happening in China. I'm Lisa. In this episode, the United States and Japan are trying to form a new NATO in Asia, and the Chinese and Russian militaries responded with strength. Taiwan spent $740 million to buy American arms, but the US neither delivered weapons nor refunded the money. China criticized the US for intimidating the World Anti-Doping Agency during the Paris Olympics. Italian Prime Minister visited China and expressed regret for withdrawing from the Belt and Road Initiative. Let's start with the new threat the United States poses to world peace. On the 28th of July, US and Japanese defense and foreign ministers held a Security Consultative Committee in Tokyo, the so-called 2+2 ministerial meeting. They were aimed to establish a new NATO-like alliance in Asia, and China and Russia responded with demonstrations of strength. The US Secretary of Defense announced the establishment of a joint force headquarters for US troops in Japan, intending to cooperate with Japan to unify the command of Japanese Army, Navy, and Air Forces. Before this decision, the US command in Japan was primarily administrative. Now it has been strengthened to a headquarters of joint forces for full-scale operation, capable of planning large-scale military operations with Japan. In addition, Japan provides bases for the US military power deployment in Asia, housing approximately 54,000 US troops, hundreds of aircraft, and the only forward-deployed US aircraft carrier strike group, along with enhanced missile production authorized by the US to support Ukraine. In the joint statement issued after the talks, the US and Japanese ministers said China's foreign policy seeks to reshape the international order for its own benefit at the expense of others, which puzzled many Chinese netizens. China served a significant role in ending division in Palestine by promoting the signing of the Beijing Declaration and boosting peace talks between Russia and Ukraine during the Ukraine's foreign minister's visit to China. Even Agence France Presse called the accusations against China a verbal attack. On the same day, the US and Japan conducted military exercise in Okinawa with 12,000 troops participating. The exercise involved 10 Osprey transport aircraft, which are notorious for their frequent accidents and raised significant concerns among residents living nearby. Since its operation started in 2007, there has been 70 deaths related to V-22 Osprey, with the most recent being in November 2023, when Osprey crashed near Yakushima Island and resulted in 8 fatalities. According to local media, the Okinawa Times, the day before the joint military exercise began, a large number of Japanese citizens held a protest rally at the gate of the military base. The US Secretary of Defense also emphasized the concept of extended deterrence, that is to deploy nuclear weapons to East Asia, and pointing out America's commitment to protect Japan. However, the Japanese media Asahi News stated that extended deterrence indicates Japan being increasingly dependent on the US, and the nuclear umbrella contradicts Japanese Prime Minister advocacy for a nuclear-free world. Last May, Kishida hosted the G7 summit in Hiroshima, where he announced the Hiroshima Vision on nuclear disarmament. However, since then, no concrete progress has been made. As a victim of nuclear attacks, Japan simultaneously calls for a nuclear disarmament while increasing its dependence on the US for nuclear protection, underscores a mounting paradox. On the other hand, when Japan faces immediate threat, the action taken by US have not always aligned with their stated commitment. On the 30th of July, 2 Russian nuclear-capable strategic bombers, escorted by jet fighters, conducted a routine flight over neutral waters in the Sea of Japan. The flight lasted more than 10 hours, and prompting the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force to scramble emergency takeoff on 3 separate occasions. But the US effectively compelled Japan to remain on the sidelines. As the US-Japan ministerial meeting was taking place, China's newest aircraft carrier, the Fujian, completed its 3rd sea trial. The trial involved training for carrier-based aircraft operations, fleet air defense and sea control projects, as well as testing the data link system. Previously, Taiwanese authorities had assessed that mainland China would need at least 3 aircraft carrier battle groups before it could execute a viable reunification plan with Taiwan. These carrier groups would be deployed in multiple directions around Taiwan to perform tasks like blockades, isolating the island, or launch military strikes while also preventing US intervention from different angles. The Fujian represents China's 3rd such aircraft carrier. While the mainland China Navy may well be ready, Taiwan clearly is not, and much of this is due to US unfulfilled commitments. On the 31st of July, Taiwan authorities revealed that as of the end of last year, $740 million in contract termination reserves remain stuck in the US and unable to be retrieved. This reserve fund is a standard requirement mandated by the US during the process of military procurement project, set aside to recover any losses if the contract is terminated early. Any remaining balance is typically refunded to the buyer at the end of the project. The US regulations allows a federally licensed bank approved by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency to provide the procurement party with a letter of credit instead of a contract terminating reserve. However, as the end of last year, the US still refused to offer a license to any bank in Taiwan, citing the need for further evaluation by its agencies due to policy adjustments. According to Taiwan's United Daily News, several US military procurement projects have experienced ongoing delays. For instance, Taiwan authorities claim to procure 100 land-based Harpoon missile systems, including 400 missiles with 32 sets and 128 missiles scheduled for delivery in 2026. However, US public records show that the Pentagon only placed the order in 2023, with the project expected to be completed by March 2029. Despite Taiwan authorities being owed a large amount of money by the US, its military budget for next year is expected to reach a record high of $19.17 billion. Moving on the 30th of July, a US bipartisan group of lawmakers introduced the Restoring Confidence in the World Anti-Doping Agency Act of 2024, threatening to cut US funding for WADA. China's embassy spokesperson in Washington, Liu Pengyu, criticized the bill, saying the US keeps selling the non-existent case and holds the threat at the international organizations to degrade Chinese athletes and hinder them from participating in the Paris Olympics. This bill will give the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy permanent authority to reduce or revoke US funding for WADA. It came less than half a month after the US received a warning by WADA on the 16th of July, criticizing its use of non-compliant laws against Chinese swimmers. The New York Times also published an article titled "China Citing Tinted Burgers, cleared swimmers in a new doping dispute. This once again misrepresented the facts surrounding two Chinese swimmers who tested positive for methanolone due to food contamination in 2022 Tokyo Olympics. According to the relevant provisions of the anti-doping rules and the World Anti-Doping Code, the athletes were without fault or negligence in this case and decided not to pursue doping violation charges against them. The handling of the case was promptly communicated to WADA and the International Swimming Federation, both of which acknowledged and accepted the decision. In addition, WADA said it would take the US Anti-Doping Agency to the Independent Compliance Review Committee, a move that could deprive the US of its rights to host the 2028 Summer and 2034 Winter Olympics. However, Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn, a co-sponsor of the bill, asserted the International Olympic Committee and WADA had tried to strong-arm the US into dropping an FBI investigation into the matter by threatening its right to host the Winter Games in 2034. Adding that the US will not give up to promote fair play, and this bill can help WADA to ensure fair representation on its governing bodies. Any country competing in an international sporting event must be compliant with the anti-doping code, but this bill will serve as a stronger version of the Rodchenkov Act, attempting to replace international rules and imposing US laws on athletes from other countries while exempting US athletes. Despite the US continuing to use its non-compliant laws against Chinese swimmers, China has so far won 5 medals in swimming events. While we have our eyes on Paris, an important European figure chose to look at China. On the 31st July, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni concluded her 5-day official visit to China. During a meeting on the 29th July, Meloni met with Chinese President Xi Jinping and other Chinese senior officials at Diaoyutai State Guest House in Beijing, and made commitment that Italy is willing to promote China-Europe trade development and relaunch its cooperation with China. She also pointed out that the insecurity is growing at the international level. China is a very important interlocutor to deal with all these dynamics. Before Meloni's visit to China, the US and EU expressed opposition. They did not want Italy, a member of the Western Bloc, to become too pro-China. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has repeatedly urged EU countries to respond to the US call for decoupling with China. Nevertheless, this is Meloni's first visit to China since Italy's withdrawal from the Belt and Road Initiative on the 6th December 2023. In early March of this year, the Italian National Statistic Institute revised the deficit as a percentage of GDP from 5.3% to 7.2%, with a total increase of about 39 billion euros, more than twice the average level of the 27 EU countries. In April, the figure was revised to 7.4%, making Italy top of the EU fiscal deficit list. Despite pressure from its allies, Italy expressed that it still wanted to maintain strong trade relationship with China. During the visit, Italy and China signed a 3-year action plan. This plan included agreements in areas like food safety, industry, trade, investment, education, and environmental protection. This trip was also seen as an effort by Italy to clarify any misunderstanding about its previous withdrawal and stressing the importance of economic ties with China. And that is all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Current. If you have any thoughts or comments about our show, please reach us at the email address below. We look forward to hearing from you and see you next time.
Very intriguing insights right there. Thank you, Lisa. Up next is the Thinkers Forum. On this segment, we'll be joined by esteemed experts, scholars, and key policymakers to provide you with diverse perspectives and thorough insights on geopolitics, shifts in foreign policy, and bilateral relations between China and the rest of the world. Richard D. Wolff, who is the founder of Democracy at Work and an influential Marxian economist, is our guest for the first part of this segment. Please stay with us.
I've been a professor of economics at the university all my life. What China has achieved in the last 30 to 40 years, the transformation from one of the poorest countries on this planet to an economic powerhouse, is extraordinary. The argument that there is something unfair about competition between the state and private enterprise is a very strange criticism, because in Britain and the United States, and indeed wherever you have private enterprise, you have terribly unfair competition between large corporations and small ones. The history of every capitalist country, including the United States, past and present, is a bitter, and I underscore that for you, a bitter struggle and conflict between large corporate enterprise and small ones. The small ones are always explaining how they are unfairly treated by big business. It is a theme. It has been a core part of the politics of every capitalist country. In fact, if you study the actual history of capitalist countries in Western Europe and North America, you will know that the small businesses have often mobilized to control the government in order to have the government reduce the unfair treatment they get from big businesses. For example, in France, the working class, the labor unions, have organized with small business. The left wing in French politics, which did very well last Sunday, got 28% of the vote. That's an alliance between workers and medium and small businesses. They oppose the right wing of Macron because he is the leader of big business. And now I put on my hat as a Marxist. I would argue that one of the great lessons of Karl Marx, I would argue that what the future of Marxism and socialism are about is a transformation, a change in the organization of the workplace, the factory, the office, the store, whether it is owned and operated by private individuals or it's owned and operated by the government. In both cases, the Marxist argument is we do not need and we do not want a small group of people at the top of this workplace making all the decisions, being in a position to hire or fire all of us who are employees, telling us what to do, how to do it, when to do it, deciding how well we do it. That is not democratic, and that is not necessary. And that human communities used to think they needed to have a king or an emperor or a czar who made all the political decisions. I think the genius of Marx was to say the same logic can and should apply to the organization of the workplace. It doesn't need a king. It doesn't need a CEO. It doesn't need an emperor at the top. It doesn't need him to be there. It doesn't need him to become a billionaire. If you look at the dispersion of billionaires in the world, the two countries with the most billionaires are the United States and China. If we make the power in the people, in the workplace, at the bottom of society, that the factory be run democratically, one person, one vote, The same for the office, the same for the store. That we give people the power over their own work and labor, that's the breakthrough. It's a democratization of work. That's why we call our organization, Democracy at Work. And we think it's the best way for the United States to cope with the relocation of capitalism away. The idea that profit is the key is a misunderstanding. And let me assure you, as an economist again, corporations in the West that have maximized profit have not done as well in the long run as corporations who didn't. I can see it over and over again. In the United States, one of the great heroes, Elon Musk, the head of Tesla, so he is a cultural hero, Mr. Musk. Okay, now what kind of a person is he? He has more children than he can remember, with as many different women as he has had relationships with. He was devoted to making a killing with his car. But Tesla is now in trouble because, for example, BYD in China produces a better electric car than Tesla can do. And that is changing the whole business. The key issue is, how are you shaping your whole economy? Look, every capitalist corporation eventually disappears. They all maximize their profit. General Motors and Ford maximize their profit, but they're disappearing as automobile companies. That was not their success. It didn't do that. So it's a little bit of an ideological trap. When you maximize your profit, you typically economize on other expenditures. And you do not know whether that is the right thing to do or not. I'll give you an example. Imagine a corporation that lowered its profits in order to provide really first-class childcare to its workers, so that every worker could bring his or her children to work, because they would be well fed, well clothed, have lots of learning activities, and be happy together with other children. Okay? They would hurt their profit, but they would do something spectacular for their workers. Okay. Now, 2 years later or 5 years later, a crisis happens in the world market. Somebody else produces a better whatever it is this company did. And now the company turns to its workers and it says, we need your help to survive this crisis. You know what? They're going to get much more help from people whose children have been taken well care of. They will realize later that it was a mistake to have maximized profit at the expense of your larger situation. For every company that you show me that has done well because it maximized profit, I will show you one that fell apart because it maximized profit. It is pro-capitalist ideology to think that maximizing profit is some sort of guaranteed arrival at the best situation. That was never true. And let me get it for you in a slightly different way. If you think about a capitalist any corporation, the revenue this company gets, it divides into different parts. Part of the revenue replaces the tools and equipment used up in production. Another part of the revenue pays the wages of the workers. And another part of the revenue goes to the investors and to the top executives as profits. All of those people participate in making that corporation successful. You therefore should maximize what you pay your suppliers. You should maximize what you pay your workers, the wages, and you should maximize profits. Why only one? All of them are needed. It is an ideological game for the people who get the profits to convince the people who do the work that the most important thing is the profit. That's a swindle. That's childish. That should be understood for the ideological self-serving of the people at the top. That's why we are required in universities to teach business school graduates the importance of maximizing profit. It's no different than telling you the important thing that makes your business successful is if you go to the church and you talk to Jesus about your business. People used to do that, and they used to think that speaking with Jesus was the route to success. Well, maximizing profit is just another variation on talking to Jesus. It's not the guarantee of anything. What it does do is make everything else less important than the people at the top. And that's what they want you to think. But don't be fooled.
Well, it's actually fascinating to know how well China's economic strategies have been put together to move the country forward. But let's now move on to the second part of the Thinkers Forum, which features excerpts of the successful opening of the Thinkers Forum 2024, held on June 17th in Moscow. It had professionals like Professor Zhang Weiwei from China, Vitaly Nomkin from Russia, Busani Ngaweni from South Africa, and Binod Singh from India, diving deep into the discourse on civilizational states and building a multipolar world.
Good morning, dear colleagues, guests, friends. We're starting our Thinkers Forum 24, Civilization State in Multiple and Multipolar Perspectives. So we all know there are serious changes occurring in the world system, and there are a lot of different concepts shared by all of us who are representing the most important countries of BRICS. So the main question that stands among us is the definition of a civilization state and the proper understanding of this concept. Does it really exist? What are its criteria and special features? How does this concept fit into the diverse contexts of the emerging multipolar world, etc.? So a lot of our colleagues are involved in deep debates about this new concept, which fits actually in the general understanding of the world system and its evolution.
It's indeed a great pleasure that we host for the first time the Thinkers Forum, together with our brotherly partners, the Oriental Institute, Russian Academy of Sciences, on the occasion of 75th anniversary of Sino-Russian diplomatic relations, and this particular Sino-Russian Year of Culture, and also this particular year of BRICS Summit to be held in Russia. So this is indeed fascinating in many ways. As we are aware, this discourse on civilizational state has now become the mainstream discussions worldwide. I remember British writer Aris Rusinus said a spectre, he coined the phrase together like the Communist Manifesto, a spectre is haunting the liberal West, the rise of the civilizational state. And not long ago, the American American journal, National Interest, also published a frontline article. It's called the Allure for the Civilizational State, the Attractiveness of Civilizational State. And the subtitle is Civilizational State and the Liberal World Order. Are they bound to collide with each other? I think with the world increasingly multipolar, we are witnessing the rise of civilizational states and civilizational discourse around the world, especially across the Eurasian continent, from China to Russia, to India, to Iran, to Turkey, and even to ASEAN countries. which represents 75% of the global population and 60% of the world GDP. I think it's only natural that leading scholars from China, Russia, and BRICS and more gather to discuss this hugely important topic. The very theme, civilizational state in multiple and multipolar perspectives, it involves three concepts. One is civilizing state, as just now Professor Nomkin mentioned in our program. This concept will discuss its relation with multipolarity and more. And multiple perspective, which means, say, theoretical, academic, policy-oriented perspectives, and the Chinese perspective, Russian perspective, Indian perspective, more. And multipolar perspective, which means we put the whole topic in the context of fast-changing world order from unipolarity to multipolarity. So that's how we have designed together with our Oriental Institute on the scene of the forum. And I said many times, if the United States is known for its deep state, which has done so much harm to American people per se, and to the world at large, it's therefore important for leading scholars from this country to get together. And I said the United States is known for deep state, but civilizing states are known for their deep peoples and deep cultures. And it's particularly true for Eurasian continent. And they all have their time-honored traditions for their own way of life, for organizing family and social life, for individual collective relationship, for state-societal relations, and for world peace and prosperity. So it's this kind of deep-rooted civilizational roots that are driving the rapid rise of a more humane, better governed, and more just world order to replace this outdated and unjust, immoral unipolarity. So with this slightly optimistic note, I wish the forum a great success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Now, I would like to introduce to you Professor Binod Singh from India.
Thank you, Mr. President Vitaly Nomkin, and thanks to our Chinese organizers from Fudan University. It's an honor to attend this very first forum in Moscow. This noon, I'm going to speak on why a country like India should go back to the original thought of foundation of New India, that is the thought of Mr. Gandhi and Mr. Nehru. When we're talking about civilizational states here, first of all, in India, we have a consensus that Moscow is the place where we're looking for new ideas. 1917 is in the deep memory of every Indian scholar, professors, especially the university where I come from. It's called Nehru University. So all of my colleagues and my seniors and my professors, they have been students of Soviet Union. They may not have been here, but they have been deeply influenced by Soviet political thinking. India is known for philosophers. If you want to make money, they say you go to USA. Or if you want to see wealth, you go to China. If you want to see the nature's beauty, you come to Russia. But if you want to see philosophers, you go to India. It is true. India, although we speak English and our education system is deeply influenced by the Western system, but if you have an Indian friend, his soul is still Indian. Doesn't matter, he lives in Silicon Valley or he lives in Shanghai or in Moscow. This is something amazing about India. But we always say in India that India is not a country. India is an idea. So when we open the BBC and CNN, what's happening in genocide in Gaza, in Israel, we really thought of Mr. Gandhi, who was one of the first to talk about two independent states, especially for Palestine. But you know, in a democracy, when a leader is very strong, the current dispensation in India is not very vocal to support the way China is supporting the rights of Palestinians. So this is something was very clear in the election result. He lost it. The state of UP, the Uttar Pradesh, the largest state, is full of Muslim population. They just said no. And I hope our leadership gets the message very clearly. We cannot stand with any deep state or state terrorism. I'm not sure this is the time to go for in the depth. I really want to appreciate the stand of China, the stand of Russia. Yesterday evening, I had a long walk at the Red Square, Kremlin. The maximum number of people were from Aleppo, Arabic states. This is the first time I see Africans and the Muslim population, they're looking to Russia for peace, for prosperity, for new world order. They're totally disgruntled and disappointed with the so-called double standards of the United States and the West. So in India, I'm not sure I represent the diplomatic or the official version of Indian foreign policy, because now they're saying this again, like they stand both sides, something like non-aligned, But the youth of India really thinks that we should have a clear stand that if American hegemonism is in decline, we should choose our side. We should work together, especially with China. I talk to many young people and they choose to learn Chinese language and go and work in China. They see the future is China. For the Russia, they say no need to talk. It's the oldest friend. No need to even speak about Russia. We are just one. There's no differences between Indian and Russian foreign policy. When it comes to China, where the Chinese philosophy of Chairman Mao Zedong starts with the power comes from the barrel of the gun, but the Gandhian philosophy is very opposite. So at times we see that we are antagonistic, but in reality, if you go to the history of Chinese culture and Indian culture, I find in Chinese they say "Ni chung yo wo, wo chung yo ni." I see everywhere the Chinese philosophy and Indian philosophy, a shared philosophy in Asia. And again, the Indian philosophy with the Arabic Islamic philosophy is so mixed that when my friends go to India and they ask for Indian sari, Indian dress, Indian sweets, it's so impacted by Turkey, Mongols, and different cultures that I really cannot make a distinction between what is Indian and what is Arabic. So I look forward for the detailed discussion today about what kind of civilization state China is putting on the table. Can we share it, or is it going to be again the way Americans say American way? Now you say Chinese way. So we have to be different from Americans. Then only we have more followers.
Thank you very much. Finally, we have another guest, esteemed guest and friend from South Africa, Dr. Busani Ndiaweni.
Good morning to all the friends here in Moscow and from India. I hope I will share the perspective from South Africa later today to see how South Africa sees the world as it evolves today, and how the civilizational stage is evolving as a counter-hegemon to what we have seen over the last couple of decades. South Africa is going through its own transition. Now it's 30 years old, and therefore, like all other 30-year-olds, it has lost some innocence. It can now be treated as an adult. It's going through typical challenges that 30-year-olds go through. If you think of our own countries when they were 30, more or less similar transitions to occur at various proportions. And I hope to share that perspective. And thank you for convening this dialogue, because this conversation ought to proceed given where the world is today and some of the challenges that many countries in the global south are going through. Some are criticizing the idea of having India, well as more China and Russia, in a conversation about the global south, because in the global north, a concept is emerging that there is actually a global east, and they are calling China a global east. So you remove it from the global south, and then they are trying to find another characterization, geographic, there is for Russia as a global northeast, so that it also stands on its own and is not part of the global south. So hopefully through this conversation, we can find some convergence and address some of the counters that we see emerging from the global north. Thank you.
And that's all for China Now. We are grateful to have had your audience for the last 60 minutes. Please don't forget to send in your comments, thoughts, feedback and suggestions for the coming episodes of the show through the email provided below. My name is Makiza Latifa, and always remember that China Now is your go-to platform for comprehensive coverage where we bring you stories that matter, whether it's the latest in technological advancements, shifts in foreign policy, cultural trends or societal changes, all the way from the bustling streets of Beijing. See you same time next week.